All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're going to strip away all that cinematic glamour to reveal the unvarnished, complex history behind some of our absolute favorite cultural legends. We all love a good story, right? The dashing spy, the romanticized outlaw lovers on the run, or that bitter, age-old family rivalry in the mountains. But when we actually dig into the historical record, we usually find that the truth isn't just wildly different from the movies, it's honestly so much more interesting.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How much of our history is just Hollywood fiction? When a story gets passed down through generations and then filtered through the bright lights of pop culture, certain details get totally blown out of proportion, while the gritty, really complex realities just get left on the cutting room floor. So today, we're going to act as historical detectives, picking apart the fiction to uncover the fascinating facts underneath. So here's a quick roadmap for today. First up, we'll dive into the real intelligence work of Ian Fleming. Then we'll look at the true story of Bonnie and Clyde. And finally, we'll head down to Appalachia to unpack the reality of the Hatfield-McCoy feud. Let's get into it.
Part 1. Ian Fleming's Secret War and the very real James Bond.
Okay, so before James Bond ever ordered that famous shaken martini, the man who wrote him into existence was literally operating at the highest levels of British military intelligence during World War II. Recruited back in 1939 by the Director of Naval Intelligence, Ian Fleming, who actually went by the codename 17F, went to work in Room 39 at the Admiralty. Now, he wasn't exactly a field agent dodging bullets, but he was an absolute visionary when it came to planning deceptive, highly imaginative military operations. We're talking about setting up a stay-behind network in Spain called Operation GoldenEye, and even coordinating intelligence for the D-Day landings. I mean, Fleming's mind for deception was just wild. Look at this 1939 Trout memo. He actually compared tricking the enemy to fly fishing. This exact idea laid the groundwork for Operation Mincemeat. If you haven't heard of it, that was the famous real-life mission where British intelligence planted fake invasion plans on a corpse and floated it right onto the coast of Spain to trick the Nazis. It just completely proves that in the world of espionage, truth is often stranger and a whole lot more macabre than fiction. And you can see exactly how this tactical brilliance bled right into his writing. Take the 30 Assault Unit, or 30 AU. Fleming couldn't go on these super dangerous raids himself, right? So instead, he designed an elite unit of commandos to go ahead of the advancing Allied troops, specifically to steal enemy codes and documents. The unbelievable danger these men faced, their highly specialized training, and just their sheer audacity, that provided the direct genetic material for the character of James Bond.
So, James Bond? He isn't actually just one guy. He's more like a fascinating puzzle made up of the daring, real-life operatives Fleming worked alongside. For instance, Fleming literally shadowed a Serbian triple agent named Duško Popov in a Lisbon casino and watched him confidently bluff an opponent with $40,000. That specific event directly inspired the plot of Casino Royale. Bond also got his rebellious streak from a commando named Patrick Dalzeljob, and his larger-than-life, powerful presence from the Canadian spy master William Stevenson.
Now, what about that iconic number? Well, you might be surprised to learn that the famous 007 moniker likely stems from 0075. That was the code for the intercepted Zimmerman telegram. Breaking that code was basically the pinnacle of British military intelligence back in the First World War, and it's a huge part of what brought the U.S. into that conflict. So for anyone versed in intelligence history, assigning Bond a variation of this number signaled the absolute highest tier of classified achievement. Moving on to Part 2, Bonnie, Clyde, and Retribution, the romanticized outlaws. We've all seen the movies, right? We tend to picture Bonnie and Clyde as these glamorous 1930s anti-heroes sticking it to the banks during the Great Depression. But grounding them in reality paints a much, much more brutal picture. Just look at this rare snapshot of Bonnie Parker before the nationwide manhunts. She was a young woman from a really strict, austere family who just craved love and excitement. When she met Clyde Barrow, she didn't just find a boyfriend. She found a fatalistic path, and she threw herself into it with a terrifying, obsessive loyalty. Just listen to the words of her poem, Suicide Sal, which she actually wrote while sitting in a jail cell. It is haunting, and it perfectly captures that obsessive, fatalistic mindset. She wrote this specifically to signal to Clyde that she was just as reckless and committed to their doomed lifestyle as he was. It was basically her dark resume, proving she would ride with him to the bitter end, fully aware that their story was going to conclude in intense violence. And the gritty reality of their spree? It ended incredibly violently, all thanks to a Texas Ranger named Frank Hamer. Now, Hamer wasn't some polished Hollywood protagonist. He was a hardened, old-school marksman who literally compared criminals to coyotes. See, after Bonnie and Clyde's gang murdered 2 highway patrolmen in cold blood in Grapevine, Texas, the public outcry was deafening. People had had enough. So Hamer was brought out of retirement to systematically track them down, which he did, eventually setting up that lethal, inescapable ambush in Louisiana.
The aftermath is almost as crazy as the crime spree itself. Let's trace the incredibly macabre journey of their Ford V8 death car, showing how a stolen getaway vehicle transformed into this bizarre artifact of Americana. The V8 was Clyde's favorite because it was fast, but common enough to blend in. But after the 1934 ambush left it totally riddled with bullet holes, it was returned to its original owner, who immediately sold it. For decades, it was toured across the country at carnivals, where people paid a dime just to gawk at it. Today, it sits in a casino in Nevada. It's a crazy marketing strategy that perfectly leverages our enduring, morbid fascination with their crimes.
All right, Part 3, The Real Hatfield-McCoy Feud, an Appalachian Caricature. When I say Hatfields and McCoys, you probably picture a bunch of uneducated, backwoods guys brawling over a stolen pig, right? Well, scratch that. The reality was a deep, intense socioeconomic crisis fueled by changing times and very real outside industrial interests. The whole region was being transformed by Eastern capitalists eager to extract coal and timber. The real conflict here was between local mountain folks trying to maintain their traditional community autonomy and the overwhelming, unstoppable forces of a new industrial machine creeping into their valley.
Just take Devil Ant Hatfield, for example. The guy was not some uneducated caricature. He was a deeply shrewd businessman navigating a totally shifting economy. Devil Ants was a Confederate cavalry veteran who came home and built a massively successful timber operation. He actually won thousands of acres of virgin timberland in a lawsuit against a McCoy relative. So he wasn't fighting out of sheer ignorance. He was violently defending a massive economic empire that he had built from the ground up.
If we look at the breakdown between the two families, we see that the Tug Fork Valley was actually a huge battleground of contrasting economies and local power dynamics. It wasn't just petty family grudges. On the West Virginia side of the river, you had the Hatfields heavily capitalizing on the new timber boom. On the Kentucky side, you had Randolph McCoy's family, who were largely just trying to hold on to traditional agrarian farming. The bloodshed that followed all of this, the ambushes, the legal battles, the executions, it was the tragic friction of 2 completely different ways of life colliding head-on during a period of massive national transition.
Which brings us to Part 4, History Beyond the Legends, the Unvarnished Truth.
So, bringing it all together, the big takeaway here is that pop culture absolutely loves a simple myth. But history is so much more fascinating. Myths give us these clean-cut heroes and villains that are super easy to digest. But the unvarnished history gives us complex, deeply flawed humans navigating real things like war, economic depression, and social upheaval. And understanding that reality, that equips us with a far better, much richer understanding of our world today.
So I'm going to leave you with this thought. Which of your favorite historical legends are just Hollywood fiction waiting to be debunked? Seriously, next time you watch a movie based on a true story, or you hear an old legend, I challenge you to dig a little deeper. Because as we've seen in this explainer today, the real truth is always waiting just beneath the surface. Thanks so much for joining me, and keep questioning the narrative.